Hello, good morning, good morning. Welcome to the first day of retreat. Let me ensure that everyone has the link. All right. While I'm waiting for people to join, I'm going to do some prayers. Okay, so it looks like everyone's going to be tuning in asynchronously. So let's go ahead and begin. Retreat. The word retreat in Tibetan actually means boundary. So, in an important sense, anytime you're setting up boundaries to enhance your practice, you're doing retreat. And if you're trying to attain greater capability in meditation in particular, as a beginner, uh, which is all of us, even if we've been doing this 30 years, as a person who doesn't have absolutely extraordinary meditative capability already, one of the most important things to do in terms of setting boundaries is to reduce distraction. Another incredibly important thing to do is to maintain pure ethics. So, uh, the reason for this is that ethics and meditation share many of the same mental factors in common. And also, when you engage in unethical behavior, this disturbs your mind. So, just as an example, if you went out and stole something, then you're going to start worrying about, oh, are other people going to find out that I stole, or is someone going to come bang on my door and take me away to jail? You know, is someone going to sue me to try to get back whatever it is I stole, right? So if you steal things, then your mind is disturbed and it becomes more difficult to engage in deep meditative practice. Uh, Frankly, it becomes more difficult to engage in even shallow level meditative practice. Secondly, um, ethics shares in common with meditation two what are called mental factors in Buddhist psychology. A mental factor is if you were making a cup of tea, right? The water is like your mind, and the tea bag is like the mental factor that flavors the mind. So there are always, in this case, the tea is always tea. There's always mental factors in the water. Um, or perhaps we should say there are mental factors that come along with the tea always, right? So that's more like the tea. And then there are mental factors that are optional. So you can add honey or sugar or milk. Or if you were going to make really bad tea, you could put other things in there that aren't very delicious, right? Okay. So mental factors are these things that color your main awareness. There are two mental factors you need to cultivate in order to be successful in meditation. The first is what's often called mindfulness, but it's more accurately translated, I feel, as non-forgetfulness. So this quality of memory, remembering what it is you're doing and remembering the instructions for what you're doing, which we've discussed before. So actively remembering what you're doing means being able to place your mind on the breath and count the breath and actively remembering that that is what you're doing. If you forget that that's what you're doing, your mind runs off and does something else. If you forget the instructions, for example, if you forget that, well, I'm focusing on my nostril, and if I find my mind has run off, I'm supposed to bring it back, right? These are some of the instructions. Well, then you can't make progress in meditation either. So mindfulness or non-forgetfulness has two aspects. One is what we would call active memory or working memory in Western psychology. It's the active memory of what it is you're engaged in. And the other is long-term memory. So recalling the instructions you've been given on the practice, remembering uh, the antidotes for the problems that come up in meditation, etc. And the other mental factor that you need that is quite difficult to develop to any great degree if you don't already have some mindfulness is a mental factor called alertness. So alertness, another word for it that's recently entered the literature by way of Thupten Jinpa is the word meta-awareness, but that sounds very sort of Western academic-y. Meta-awareness or alertness or vigilance, these all refer to the same mental factor, and it's the mental factor of being aware of the quality of your mind. So, by way of example, non-forgetfulness is like my hand holding the cup of tea. Okay? So my hand is here remembering actively that you're holding a cup of tea. Don't forget that you're holding the cup of tea or you're going to drop the tea. Okay? Vigilance or meta-awareness is aware of the specific quality of my mind. How's my mind doing? You know, is my mind scattered? Is my mind uh, does it have a lot of conceptual activity today? Is my mind very tired? So meta awareness, in to use the example of the tea, is aware of, am I holding the tea? I'm holding the tea still, but now I'm holding it at an angle. I'm holding the tea still, but now I'm holding the tea without dropping it, but my hand is shaking now. Right. So it's aware of the quality of how you're doing the activity. So in the case of meditation, maybe you're keeping the mind on the breath, but your meta awareness is aware that when you're trying to visualize the numbers, they're coming in very fuzzy. It doesn't necessarily mean that you need to change the numbers and make them more clear. For example, if you're visualizing the numbers during Foundation 1, but what it does mean is that there's an aspect of your mind that is aware of all of the other qualities that are going on in the mind. Another analogy is it's like a guard at a checkpoint who is checking the paperwork of everyone who comes in. So it's this quality of mind that's aware of the rest of what's happening in your mind and how it's going and the quality of your mind while you're engaged in meditation. And this mental factor has the ability to detect faults in your meditation. And the main two faults in your meditation are that it's wavering, or that you've dropped the you've dropped the tea entirely, right? Another quality is that you have gotten tired and you're tipping the cup of tea, right? So if you're getting tired or exhausted and the mind is sort of sinking and getting dull and you feel like you're headed towards sleep, that's another fault. But that fault, generally, you don't try to deal with that too much until you've already made the mind very stable, which is humbly probably not any of us in the room. Okay. So when you take vows, uh, vows are vows act as a support for meditation. One, because you're doing less bad things, and therefore there will be less conflict and less anxiety about the things you've done. Two, your negative actions are motivated by negative mental factors, and those negative mental factors are by nature disturbing to your mind. So by not chasing them, your mind is more calm. So in those two ways, training in ethics supports your meditative practice. Third, to maintain ethics, which are unusual relative to your normal way of acting, you have to have mindfulness. You have to remember, yes, I took these vows. Normally I would do X, Y, and Z, but today I'm not going to do those things. Right? So you have to train in mindfulness all day. And then introspection or vigilance or meta awareness, whatever you'd like to call it. You are aware of how well you're maintaining those commitments. You know, You go, oh, wow, yeah, I have strong desire right now to do this thing I vowed not to do for the next 5 days. Okay, wow, all right, well, I'm not going to follow that desire. But having these vows creates more vigilance, more meta awareness, more awareness of how it is you're doing with maintaining the vows, right? Now, some vows have to do with avoiding behaviors that are negative by nature. So, the vows that I have recommended for this retreat, the 8 Mahayana vows, or the what's sometimes called the 1 day Mahayana vows, which you can just you can just take for the duration of the retreat, are to not kill, to not steal, to not engage in sexual activity at all, even though sexual activity is not negative by nature. Um, to not tell lies, and to avoid intoxicants. Now, there are debates about intoxicants, whether or not those are negative by nature. According to Buddhist psychology, some people say yes, some people say no. But if you intoxicate the mind, you tend to lose your vigilance and your mindfulness. So you forget what it is you intended to do, and you have difficulty seeing the quality of your own mind, and therefore you also there's this mental quality called heedlessness that comes up, where you have less inhibition, and so you just do whatever, and therefore you're more likely to engage in other negative forms of behavior if you drink. So this is why intoxicants are on the list, even if it's not negative by nature. Sexual activity is not negative by nature, but because lust is such a strong mental factor, avoiding it for retreat reduces negative mental behavior. In general, though, it's good to avoid sexual misconduct. In other words, cheating on people, abusing people, that sort of thing. And then there's a number of other things here in the 8 Mahayana vows, 1 day vows, uh, that are not negative by nature, but that support being in retreat. Okay, so not sitting on high and large seats with pride actually is the full vow. So if you're not sitting on high seats or beds, what's really being referred to there, I have heard through commentary, is at various times in history, and even now, there um, it was a common practice for a high seat to be used as a point of pride. And so your high seat or your high bed was something that you had in particular to laud yourself over others, to make yourself feel more important, more authoritative. Um, so basically, it's increasing your arrogance if you're using things in that way, right? So to reduce your arrogance for the duration of the retreat, you don't sit on, big expensive seats and beds that make you feel more important than other people. Not eating food at the wrong times. Again, there's nothing inherently unethical about eating food at whatever time of day is suitable to you and your health. But for the duration of the retreat, and I've talked to you about some of you have some health conditions that make this impractical. And so you can modify this vow to basically just be that you're going to consume the amount of food you need to get through the day, but no more, right? And that's really what this vow is about. There are some other aspects to it, but not eating food at the wrong times in this case means that you will eat breakfast and perhaps also lunch, or you could just eat lunch, would be the most traditional way to do it. And that would be the one meal of the day. And then the rest of the day is spent training your mind and doing virtuous activity. And the reason for this is that generally speaking, we have very strong attachment to our food. And we spend a lot of time thinking about food and fantasizing about food and trying to make all the food really perfect and all this stuff. And that's actually distracting if you're trying to attain deep states of meditation. And so, unless it's for health reasons, uh, and that is a perfectly legitimate reason to not take this vow, by the way, or to modify this vow quite heavily if you decide that you're going to try to take it in some form, right? But if you have health concerns. But um, if you're trying to avoid those distractions, this vow is quite helpful. So the next is to avoid perfumes, garlands, and ornaments, as well as dancing, singing, and so forth. Um, I'm actually not quite sure what fits under the category of and so forth, but basically, this is a commitment to try to avoid distracting unnecessary activities, right? If you're putting perfumes on the body, garlands on the body, jewelry on the body, etc., that serves no purpose for the duration of the retreat, then you are just distracting yourself from the activity of the retreat. So when I take these vows, typically what I do, because you're still bathing and such, is that I purchase uh, unscented soap and unscented deodorant and things like that, because I can't sit around smelling really bad, or it'll disturb my wife's mind, and then she won't want me to do any more retreats in the future, right? So this has to do with having sort of the minimum amount of distractions. Unless dance without music and so forth, and maybe doing very, very slow dancing and that sort of thing, unless that's part of what you're doing to try to enter a deeper state of meditation for the duration of the retreat, then it should be avoided, right? You'll certainly find that if you cut off a lot of distractions for the duration of our time together, that um, memories of previous distraction will become very intense. So you'll remember music, you'll remember TV shows, you'll remember if you did dancing recently, you'll remember the dancing. You'll remember the smell of the shampoo that you use. You'll realize that all of these things are actually sort of replaying in your mind as you're trying to attain deeper states of meditation. So I will, if I haven't already, I believe I have linked it in the retreat document, but I will ensure that you have the link for the Mahayana vows. And during the next session, we will take these vows together. And then as the day progresses, we'll get into actually doing some practice. But taking these vows, in brief, incredibly powerful if you're into karma and rebirth. Taking these vows is incredibly powerful positive karma, whose benefits really cannot be overstated. So even beyond simply being a beautiful support for your retreat time together, taking these vows, even for a short period of time, incredibly meritorious, incredibly powerful positive karma. So that wraps up session number 1. Session number 2, we will actually take these vows together, and then for the remainder of the day, we'll begin working through the 5 foundations. So welcome to the April retreat of 2026.